Difference between retro and vintage. What's the difference between retro and vintage? Or antique for that matter?
Retro often implies that something is cool and hip, and also old or based on an older-than-current style. Example: I love that bright red retro beanbag chair my mom got in the 1970s. I just bought some awesome retro-style running shoes. Vintage is used for objects that are usually older than retro implies. There is also some implication that the object is classier than if it were retro. Example: we bought a vintage armoire at the antique market, and it's in excellent condition. There's also probably some situations where either word would be appropriate. Was there a specific context you saw that raised this question?
From Merriam-Webster. Retro, a DJ, relating to, reviving, or being the styles and especially the fashions of the past, fashionably nostalgic or old-fashioned. Vintage, a DJ. 1C, of old, recognized, and enduring interest, importance, or quality. Classic, venerable. 2A, marked by an advanced age, dating from the past. You can have new clothing with a retro style that harks back to an earlier era, or you can have vintage clothing that dates from, and was actually manufactured in, that era.
Retro means something patterned after an old style. Vintage normally means something that really is old. I think the difference between vintage and antique is a matter of degree. A 20-year-old chair might be called a vintage chair, it wouldn't be called an antique. A 200-year-old chair would be called an antique. A chair made in a style that was popular 20 years ago would be retro. I don't think I've ever heard retro used to describe something mimicking a style that was popular hundreds of years ago, it's more like decades.
Retro means something done in an intentionally old-fashioned style, a retro 1950s style MP3 jukebox. Vintage means an authentic piece from a specified time period in the past, though not necessarily long ago, a vintage 1978 clock radio. Antique refers to something from a long time ago, typically several generations and various defined, in different areas, as 50 to 100 or more years ago, an antique Victrola phonograph.
If you want to support the channel, please consider liking and subscribing.